Hello and welcome to Eastern Europe Review, a program focusing on Belarus, Ukraine and Russia. This is a joint production of BELSAT TV and TVP World. My name is Dmitry Mitskevich and here are the main topics. Another fake by Lukashenko's KGB. Ukrainian saboteurs were to blow up trains in Belarus.
This is the incompetence of the people who wrote the script. The security service of Ukraine doesn't have a division that operates on the territory of other countries.
The rulers of Russia and North Korea met in Vladivostok. How did it affect the life of the city?
How do I get into town? The forum is until the 15th of September. Do I have to live in a tent until the 15th?
Ukraine has regained control of key towers in the Black Sea. Why is it important?
The enemy used the platforms as stationary points for surveillance, information gathering, information acquisition, electronic reconnaissance, and combat.
Lukashenko's KGB claimed to have identified saboteurs recruited by Ukraine and thwarted their alleged terrorist attacks on Belarusian railways. The Lukashenko regime's propaganda TV channel created a movie about this incident, although the screenwriters didn't specify which Ukrainian organization was responsible for the alleged activities. Accusations against neighboring countries have become a tradition for the Lukashenko regime, but why is it so persistent in portraying Ukraine as a source of terrorism?
Propaganda media in Belarus reported that the so-called State Security Committee of Belarus detained 3 combat cells that were allegedly preparing terrorist attacks while working for the security service of Ukraine.
This is the incompetence of the people who wrote the script. The security service of Ukraine doesn't have a division that operates on the territory of other countries.
The Belarusian state TV channel, ONT, released a 45-minute film titled Demons of Terror, which detailed the preparation of terrorist attacks and the successful neutralization of terrorists. According to the film, Lukashenko's KGB discovered 6 people recruited by the Ukrainian special services. These individuals were involved in activities such as photographing infrastructure objects, damaging relay cabinets, smuggling explosives and weapons into Belarus, and preparing to sabotage railway tracks.
The regime doesn't say anything about the fact that Lukashenko and his associates support Russia's war against Ukraine, but at the same moment they say that Ukraine is carrying out terrorist attacks on the territory of Belarus.
The telefilm incorporates footage from surveillance cameras and night vision cameras. Additionally, it includes footage of alleged surveillance by KGB officers, emphasizing that the committee had identified the saboteurs in advance.
The regime wants to show that the KGB, Gubopik, and other structures completely control the situation in Belarus, and nobody can do anything about it.
The authors highlight that a citizen who reported a suspicious individual played a role in identifying one of the alleged saboteurs, implying that ordinary people cooperate with the special services and the regime in general. Moreover, the authors consistently suggest that the terrorists recruited by Ukraine were acting against Belarusians.
At the end of the film, the message is conveyed that they wanted to blow up a civilian train where your parents, girlfriend, sister, and so on could be. This implies that Ukraine is a terrorist country, even though Ukrainian special services have never carried out terrorist attacks against civilians.
This is not the first accusation made by Lukashenko's regime against Ukraine. Lukashenko himself claimed that Ukraine had been preparing an attack on Belarus. The regime detained a Ukrainian citizen and accused him of being involved in the explosion of the Russian A-50 plane, which occurred in Belarus in April. In 2017, propaganda reported a story about a jeep with weapons allegedly crossing the Belarusian-Ukrainian border and the detention of several dozen saboteurs. The latest narrative about Ukrainian terrorists continues this tradition.
They need to somehow explain to Belarusian society, its supporters, the state apparatus and the power structures why Belarus joined this war and why Belarus supports Russia in this aggression. Because Belarusian society neither supports the war in general nor the participation of Belarus in the war.
According to the authors of the propaganda film, the Ukrainian side is preparing terrorist attacks in Belarus to show the presence of a partisan movement just before the parliamentary and presidential elections. Nevertheless, it raises questions about whether Ukraine has more pressing matters to attend to than the elections in Belarus.
The Eastern European Forum in Vladivostok and the visit of the North Korean dictator to Russia disrupted the daily life of Far East residents for a week. Drivers found themselves stuck in traffic jams, and people couldn't leave their yards through their usual routes due to the arrival of Putin, high-ranking officials, oligarchs, and businessmen. Interestingly, not a single foreign leader attended the International Forum during this time.
Vladivostok is the capital of Primorsky Krai and a prominent city in the far east of Russia. Situated along the shores of the Sea of Japan, this region encompasses several islands, with Russky Island being the largest among them. Since 2015, Russia has hosted the International Eastern Economic Forum on Russky Island, traditionally attracting leaders from various countries worldwide. This has remained consistent despite international concerns regarding Russia's annexation of Crimea, internal repression, and the war in Ukraine. However, this year marked a significant departure from the norm, as Russian President Vladimir Putin took the stage in solitude for the first time.
A new model of relations, of integration is being born, but it's no longer based on Western models for a select golden billion, but for the whole of humanity.
The Kremlin's International Forum has been essentially transformed into a regional and domestic Russian event. This year, no significant economic deals were concluded, and there were no prominent political statements either. Nevertheless, this large-scale event significantly affects the daily lives of Far East residents.
The only thing that pleased me was that many rich and wealthy people arrived in our city. Since I work in the service sector, I was able to make money out of it. Otherwise, nothing pleased me.
Utility services in Vladivostok swiftly mowed lawns, laid new asphalt in select areas, and removed commercial advertising in preparation for the arrival of thousands of guests from across the country. For a week, hundreds of police officers patrolled the city. Shabby and dilapidated facades of buildings along the motorcade route from the airport to hotels and Russky Island were discreetly covered with banners to ensure they did not clash with the aesthetic sensibilities of the dignitaries.
I'm sure that those moments that weren't done at all will never be done. These moments were just covered with new beautiful rags. I guess the positive thing is that the rags are new and white, that's all.
The term Potemkin village and such masquerades are traditional features of events in Vladivostok. While the Russian president was discussing macroeconomics, the city's residents were stuck in massive traffic jams. Truck traffic within the city was restricted, leading to dozens of trucks piling up on secondary streets. Authorities argued that this measure was necessary for the safety of forum participants.
How do I get into town? The forum is until the 15th of September. Do I have to live in a tent until the 15th?
This is how the police protected Vladivostok and its guest from a tourist on a bike. He had traveled 8,600 kilometers across Russia with the intention of concluding his journey in the capital of Primoria.
All the roads in the city are still covered in holes and mud. The lawns aren't mown, and the facades of buildings are dilapidated. It's beautiful where the guests pass through, but away from those places, everything is still the same.
To separate the wealthy guests from the poor local residents, authorities in the suburban village of De Fries have prohibited locals from accessing the main federal highway, where motorcades with flashing lights rush through. This has forced hundreds of people to take detours on poorly maintained roads, adding 14 kilometers to their journeys. This is how the road looks alongside the highway that the Moscow guests travel on. If anything has changed here over the years, it has only been for the worse. The visit of the North Korean dictator to Russia and his meeting with Putin coincided with the Eastern Economic Forum. The DPRK leader's visit proved to be a significant disruption for the residents of the Russian region. In Ussurisk, where Kim Jong-un's armored train was headed, the streets adjacent to the railroad tracks were completely closed to both traffic and pedestrians. Special services instructed Russians to turn away as the secret armored machine passed along the track.
On the 11th of September, Ukraine conducted a special operation in the Black Sea to regain control over the so-called boycott towers, which are oil and gas extraction platforms. These platforms were seized by Russian forces in 2014 and had been used for military purposes since the start of a full-scale invasion in 2022. What's the importance of retaking these facilities and how it could potentially impact the ongoing war?
After 9 years, Ukraine has regained control of its gas platforms. The Defense Intelligence of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine developed and executed the operation, maintaining the utmost secrecy.
If the enemy realized we were approaching so boldly, they would counteract us somehow.
The boycott towers were constructed between 2010 and 2012, with each of them costing the state $400 million. These platforms were operated by the Chornomornaftogaz company, which was under the authority of the Ministry of Energy of Ukraine at that time. Yuri Boyko, who headed the ministry during that period, personally oversaw the purchase. This acquisition sparked a scandal, as it was reported that one of the units cost twice the market price. The controversy surrounding the head of the ministry led to the platforms being nicknamed Boyko Towers.
At that time in this criminal case, he was just a witness. And as far as we know from the public space, this criminal case did not end in anything for Yuri Boyko. Well, at least it didn't end with a prison term.
In 2019, Boyko ran as a presidential candidate in Ukraine from the opposition Platform for Life. This political force is considered pro-Russian within Ukraine and was banned as of September last year. Meanwhile, following the annexation of the peninsula, the Crimean parliament privatized the Chornomornaftogaz company.
The first thing the occupiers did was to annex the property of Chornomornaftogaz in Crimea. They also seized the drilling platforms and all the equipment, and they did it all with the help of Russian soldiers.
The drilling platforms were initially located 100 kilometers from Odessa. However, in 2015, Russia relocated them closer to the coast of Crimea and began employing them for illegal gas extraction, primarily to meet the needs of the Russian military. As per expert assessments, this move will likely result in a significant fuel shortage in Crimea.
These are good symptoms for us, because all these logistical deficits are important indicators of enemy defeat.
It remains uncertain whether Ukraine can use the platforms for their original purpose. However, what experts unanimously agree on is that gaining control over the towers could greatly enhance Ukraine's position in sea-based grain exports.
This is another significant step towards unblocking the waters of the Black Sea, so to speak, by resuming the grain corridor without the participation of the Russian Federation.
Considering that the Russian military had used the platforms for their military purposes and had guarded them with the Black Sea Fleet, it must be noted that following Ukraine's military operation, the Russian fleet vacated this area.
The enemy used the platforms as stationary points for surveillance, information gathering, information acquisition, electronic reconnaissance, and combat. In particular, they also used them as points where ammunition, including helicopter missiles, was stored.
Ukraine's defense intelligence has emphasized that the operation to seize the platforms, as it leaves a section of the Black Sea en route to the peninsula without Russian surveillance, brings Ukraine several steps closer to reclaiming Crimea.
That's all for today. Eastern Europe Review will be back next Sunday. Please stay with TVP World and stand with Ukraine.